The wooden horse made almost no sound when it hit the bottom of the waste bin. That was the part I could not get past afterward. Not the words, not the faces, but the smallness of the sound. 2 months of evenings at a kitchen table on Maple Grove Lane, wood shavings falling into my late wife's old mixing bowl, a mane carved stroke by stroke because a 7-year-old girl had once told me she wished she had a horse. All of it landed with a click no louder than a dropped button, 4 feet from a marble hearth, in a house where every other object had been chosen by someone paid to choose objects. My son-in-law did not look at where it landed. He had already turned back to his glass. I stood up from that table. I put on my coat, and 3 weeks later I bought a one-way ticket and left a cherrywood box sitting in the exact center of an empty kitchen. A box that, when my daughter finally found it, drained the color from her face in the length of a single breath, because inside it was the one thing she had never once considered she might lose. Before I take you through all of it, let me say this plainly. If stories like this one find something true in you, stay with me and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. It matters more than you'd guess. Now let me start where it actually started, which was not with the horse. It was with a suit. There are two kinds of cold in New York in December. There is the kind that bites your face the moment you step outside, and that one I knew, 43 winters on Long Island, had made us thoroughly acquainted. But there is another kind. It waits for you inside a warm room full of people who have already decided what you are, and it does not touch your skin at all. That one I had been slower to learn. I was still learning it on the evening the N train pulled into Times Square, and a man in a navy suit that had seen better decades stood up and told himself it was going to be a fine evening. I had bought that suit in 2009 for a wedding in Connecticut. Rosalind stood behind me at the mirror in the department store, adjusting the collar with both hands, and said, "Walter Hensley, you look like a man who built something worth wearing a suit for." I kept it for 18 years because of that sentence, because of the way she said it, not as a compliment. As a fact she was simply reporting. The way she reported most things she had already decided were true. I wore it that night because I wanted Bradley Kensington to see me in it. I wanted my daughter to see me in it. I had been making that kind of small private effort for 3 years. Ever since Rosalind passed, and Vanessa's visits began arriving with longer and longer gaps between them. I had started showing up to dinners the way a man shows up to a job site he hasn't been called to in a while. Early, prepared, quietly hoping the work was still his. The box sat on my lap the entire ride into the city. Cherrywood, hand-cut, the lid fitted with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years making things that did not wobble. Inside, wrapped in a square of green felt, was a horse the size of a man's fist, mane carved in individual strokes. Legs proportioned correctly, the kind of toy that takes patience instead of money. Sophie was 7 years old. 2 Thanksgivings earlier she had told me, with the Gravity children reserved for their most serious business, that she wished she had a horse. I had remembered. The Kensington residence on the Upper East Side was the kind of building that made the whole street feel like it was auditioning. White limestone facade. A doorman in a coat that had certainly cost more than my first truck. String lights across the entrance glowing with the particular restraint of money that no longer needs to announce itself. I stood on the sidewalk a moment in the December air, my breath fogging over the box under my arm, and I straightened my jacket the way Rosalind used to straighten it for me. Then I rang the bell. Margaret Kensington opened the door herself, which surprised me until I understood that it was not an accident. She was a tall woman, silver-haired, in a dress the color of Merlot, with the posture of someone who had been correct about most things for so long that she had stopped checking. Her smile was warm the way a contract is warm, technically correct, no excess. "Mr. Hensley," she extended her hand. "How punctual. Please come in. It's absolutely dreadful out there." The entry hall was marble and candlelight, and the smell of pine and something expensive being served in crystal. 15 people in the main room beyond, women in gowns, men in dark suits that were not from 2009. A string quartet playing somewhere I could not locate. "The other guests are just gathering," Margaret said, and her eyes made a pass from my collar to my shoes. So brief and so precise that I understood it had been practiced. "I'm afraid the main table is rather fully committed this evening. We have some of Bradley's partners and their families, and the seating has been rather carefully arranged." She touched my arm, light as a bird landing on a wire. We've set up something more comfortable for you near the kitchen. More intimate, actually. I do hope you understand. The other guests have certain expectations of the atmosphere. I looked past her shoulder into the main room. Bradley stood near the fireplace with a group of men laughing at something, and Vanessa, my daughter, in a blue gown I had never seen, stood beside him with her hand on his arm. Our eyes met across that room for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned toward the woman speaking to her, and smiled as though she had not seen anything at all. Something in my chest did a thing that was tight and specific, and that I recognized but did not name. "Of course," I said to Margaret. "Lead the way." The table near the kitchen was a small round two-top tucked behind a serving station. Beside the corridor, the waitstaff used to move between the kitchen and the main room. A single-place setting, a water glass already filled, which struck me as either thoughtful or precise, and I could not decide which. I set the box on the chair beside me, and I sat down. From where I sat, I could see the main table. Long, formal, gleaming, and the backs of the guests who had been deemed appropriate to sit at it. I poured myself water. I cut my dinner roll. I watched my daughter laugh at something a woman in pearls said. And I thought about a kitchen table on Maple Grove Lane, where Vanessa had done her homework for 12 years, and the way Rosalind would bring her a glass of milk without being asked, setting it down without interrupting, because Rosalind understood that some kinds of love are quietest when they are most sure of themselves. I was thinking about that when I heard the small feet, fast, light, purposeful, the footsteps of a child who has somewhere specific to be, and no patience for the long way around. Sophie appeared in front of me like a declaration, red-cheeked from running, hair half escaped from whatever arrangement it had been forced into, wearing a green velvet dress whose collar she was already pulling at, because Sophie had never in her life been comfortable in formal clothing, a quality I found deeply respectable. In her hand was a small red plastic device, rectangular about the size of a matchbox. "Grandpa Walter," she announced, slightly out of breath. "I found you." "You did," I said. "You always do." She threw her arms around my neck with the whole-body commitment that only children and very old dogs still manage. And I held on, and the tightness in my chest did something complicated. Not going away, but shifting, making room for this too. "What have you got there?" I asked, nodding at the red device when she pulled back. She held it up with the gravity of someone presenting evidence. "My recorder. Miss Alvarez says a reporter always has to be ready. I record important things." She demonstrated by pressing the button. A small red light blinked on. "I recorded the fireplace this morning, and the soup, and Daddy on the phone. Sounds like a busy morning." "Very," she agreed, and set the recorder on the table beside my bread plate, with the seriousness of a journalist establishing her equipment. "I'm going to record the sound of the party." She pulled out the chair beside me and climbed up, and I looked at her, this small, certain, entirely herself child, who shared no blood with me, and who had, from the first time we met, treated me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I thought, whatever else this evening turns out to be, this part of it is all right. In the 20 minutes she sat beside me at that little table by the kitchen corridor, I learned that the soup course had been too salty, but in a good way. That the string quartet was playing a song she recognized from a movie but couldn't name. And that the woman in the red dress near the fireplace had the same laugh as a sea lion, which Sophie demonstrated quietly into her hand so that only I could hear. I laughed, actually laughed, the short-chested kind that surprised me with how badly I had needed it. "You're very observant," I told her. "Miss Alvarez says that's the most important thing a reporter can be." She had retrieved the red recorder from beside my bread plate and was holding it in both hands, pointed generally toward the room. "I've been recording this whole time. The party sounds different than I thought it would." "How did you think it would sound?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Happier," she said finally. I had no answer for that, so I did not try to give her one. Instead, I reached into my jacket's inner pocket and pulled out the photograph I had been carrying since September. The one I'd had reprinted at the pharmacy on Maple Grove Lane, because the original had begun to curl at the corners. Rosalind, summer of 2018. Standing on the front steps of our house with one hand raised to block the afternoon sun, her head tipped back, laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. The light in that picture was the particular gold of a Long Island July, and it had always made the photograph look like something from a movie about a life better than most. Can I show you something? I asked. Sophie lowered the recorder immediately and leaned in the way children do when they understand that what's coming is real. I set the photograph on the table between us. She studied it for a long moment. Not the quick glance of a child being polite. The careful looking of someone who understands that certain things require more than a second. She's laughing really hard, Sophie said. She was. She laughed like that at everything, the good things and the hard things both. She had a gift for finding what was funny about a situation even when the situation wasn't cooperating. Remember her hands, Sophie said quietly. She had soft hands. She let me braid her hair once. I was only 5, so it wasn't very good. But she said it was beautiful, and she wore it like that the whole afternoon. My throat did something I was not prepared for. I pressed the back of my thumb against the corner of my eye, quick and deliberate, and cleared my throat. She would be very glad to hear you remember that, I said. She talked about you, you know. After that visit. Sophie looked up from the photograph. Her eyes were serious and brown, and entirely present in the way that children's eyes are, before the world teaches them to be somewhere else while their bodies are still in the room. I miss her, she said, even though I only met her twice. Is that allowed? Missing someone isn't about how many times you met them, I said. It's about what they left in the room when they were there. Rosalind left a lot. Sophie nodded slowly, accepting this as fact. Then she picked up the recorder and pointed it at the photograph with great ceremony. I'm going to record this part, she announced. For important things. She pressed the button. The red light blinked on. I was watching her face, the small frown of concentration. The way she held the device with both hands like a chalice, when I became aware of footsteps behind me. Not the quick light steps of serving staff. Slower, more deliberate, the particular rhythm of a man crossing a room he owns. Bradley stopped beside the table. He looked at the photograph the way he looked at most things that did not belong to his world, with the brief, dismissive attention of a man cataloging what requires removal. What is this doing out here? It had the shape of a question and the weight of something already decided. Really, Mr. Hensley, a personal photograph. At a formal dinner, in the middle of the table, Sophie's chin came up. We were looking at Grandma Rosalind. This isn't the time or the place, Bradley said, reaching past her and picking up the photograph with 2 fingers. The way you pick up something you aren't sure about. He turned and handed it without looking to a passing waiter carrying a tray of used glassware. Take this to the back, please. The waiter, young, tired, halfway through a long shift, took it without registering what it was and kept moving toward the kitchen. The photograph disappeared into the crowd. Sophie's mouth opened. Her whole body went rigid the way a child's body goes when something happens so fast and so wrong that it takes a moment for the understanding to arrive. When it did, her eyes went wide and glassy, and she turned to look at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. The specific devastation of a child who has just watched an adult do something she did not know adults were allowed to do. My hands were flat on the table. I pressed them down hard against the surface, feeling the cloth, focusing on the texture of it, because what was moving through my chest in that moment needed somewhere to go that was not my face. Grandpa Walter, Sophie said, and her voice came out smaller than usual. I'm sorry, come here. She climbed off her chair and into the space beside me, and I put my arm around her shoulders and held on, and she pressed her face into the lapel of my 2009 suit and breathed in the unsteady way of a child, working very hard not to cry in a room full of adults. That was not your fault, I said into the top of her head. Not a single part of it. Bradley had already moved away, back toward the main table, back toward the room that was his. Sophie pulled back and looked up at me, cheeks flushed, eyes wet at the corners. Then, with the sudden practicality of a child shifting gears, she reached up and tucked the red recorder, still running, its small light still blinking, into the breast pocket of my jacket, the way she had watched her father pocket his phone 100 times. A simple, unremarkable gesture. For safekeeping, she said, with great seriousness. So nothing happens to it. I looked down at the small rectangular bulge in my pocket. Good thinking, I said. She climbed back into her chair, straightened her green velvet dress, picked up my unused dessert spoon, looked at her reflection in it upside down, and did not say another word about the photograph or the man who had taken it. Neither did I. But I sat with my hand resting over that pocket for the rest of the time I spent at that table, and I could feel faintly, Through the fabric of the jacket Rosalind had always liked on me, the small, steady weight of a thing that was still running. Sophie left 20 minutes later. She hugged me once more, hard, the way she hugged everything, like she was trying to leave an impression. Then a woman in a black uniform appeared at the edge of the serving corridor and said that Miss Sophie's bath was at 8:30. And Sophie looked at me with the expression of someone being recalled from somewhere she'd rather stay. "I'll see you Christmas morning," she said, with the certainty of a child who has not yet learned that plans fall apart. "You will," I said. She retrieved her recorder from my breast pocket. I'd forgotten it was there, and tucked it under her arm and followed the woman in black toward the main staircase without looking back. The way Rosalind never looked back either when she was sure of where she was going. I sat alone at that small table for another 10 minutes. The party moved and breathed around me, entirely indifferent. A waiter refilled my water without making eye contact. From the main room came laughter pitched at the frequency of people performing enjoyment for one another. Then Vanessa appeared. She came around the serving station quickly, the way she moved when she did not want to be seen doing something. Shoulders slightly forward, eyes checking the room before settling on me. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, and her hair was up in the style Rosalind had always called. The one that means she's trying, and underneath all of it she looked exhausted in the specific way of a person who has been performing since 6 o'clock. "Dad." She sat in Sophie's vacated chair and leaned in, keeping her voice at a level that would not carry. "You should circulate a little. It looks strange you sitting back here all evening." "I was invited to sit here, Vanessa," I said. "So I'm sitting here." She pressed her lips together. That's not how it was meant. It's just the seating arrangement for tonight." "I understand exactly how it was meant," I said. "And I'm not making a scene about it. I'm sitting here eating my dinner and talking to your daughter." Something moved across her face that I could not fully read. Guilt and relief fighting for the same square inch of real estate. She reached out and touched my hand, brief and careful. "I brought you something," I said. I lifted the cherry wood box from the chair where it had been sitting all evening and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it the way people look at things they recognize, but have not seen in a long time, with a kind of muscle memory of feeling. "I made it for Sophie," I said. "Open it." Vanessa lifted the lid. The horse sat in its square of green felt, small, solid, the grain catching the light from the candle on the table. She ran her thumb along the curve of the mane, over the individual carved strokes. Her breath came in, just slightly. "Dad," she said, "you made this." "October and November," I said, "every evening." She was still looking at it when Bradley arrived. He came from the direction of the fireplace, a glass of something amber in one hand, moving with the easy authority of a man for whom every room has already arranged itself correctly. He stopped behind Vanessa's shoulder and looked down at the box. "What is that?" "Walter made it for Sophie," Vanessa said, "and I noticed she used my name instead of Dad, the way she did in Bradley's company when she was managing 2 conversations at once." Bradley set his glass on the table without being invited to, and reached into the box. He picked up the horse and held it at arm's length, turning it once, the way you'd inspect something at a yard sale. A whittled toy. His voice had the particular flatness of a verdict. "You brought a hand-carved wooden toy to this house." "Sophie has an entire room of handcrafted imports, Mr. Hensley. Educational pieces, European design." He turned it again. "This looks like something off a job site. The edges here," she could scratch herself. "The edges are sanded to 80 grit," I said, "then to 220. I've been working with wood for 40 years. Bradley looked at me over the horse with an expression that made very clear what he thought of 40 years of working with wood. Then he dropped it, not placed, not set down, dropped into the waste bin beside the fireplace hearth, 4 feet away without looking at where it landed. The sound it made was small and final. Vanessa's hand went to her mouth. From the corner of my eye I caught movement near the kitchen doorway. A woman in a gray uniform, heavyset, with the unhurried competence of someone who had worked in that house long enough to know when something mattered. She had been arranging serving trays on the corridor shelf. Now she was very still, watching the waste bin, watching me. Then, without a word, without drawing a single eye in that room, she crossed to the hearth, reached into the bin, and slipped the wooden horse into the front pocket of her apron. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to her trays. I stood up, not fast, not with shaking hands, The way you stand up from a piece of work when you're finished with it. Deliberate. Complete. Dad, Vanessa said, her voice dropping into something urgent and low. Please, not here. Please don't. I'm not making a scene, I said. I'm leaving. I looked at Bradley. He had retrieved his glass and was watching me with the calm of a man who has never once had to wonder whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. I've worked in a lot of homes, Mr. Kensington, I said. Built some of them myself from the foundation up. I have never once, not once, been in a home where the host threw away a man's gift in front of his face and called it hospitality. Bradley opened his mouth. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, put it on, and buttoned the front button. The one Rosalind always said made the suit look intentional instead of accidental. Then I walked out. Not fast, not looking back at Vanessa's face, because if I looked at Vanessa's face I would stop walking, and I was not going to stop walking. Behind me the string quartet finished their piece. Someone at the main table laughed. The December air outside hit me like a hand on the chest. Cold, immediate, honest. I stood on the sidewalk a moment, breathing it in. Then I heard the door open behind me, and heels on the stone steps, and I knew without turning around that whatever came next, it was not going to be Bradley. Penn Station on Christmas Eve smells like soft pretzels and diesel exhaust, and the particular desperation of people trying to get somewhere before midnight. I had taken the train down from 59th Street, standing the whole way with my jacket buttoned, and my hands in my pockets and my eyes on the middle distance. The way you learn to look on a New York subway when you don't want to invite conversation. The car was half full of people carrying shopping bags and instrument cases, and the general weight of an evening that hadn't gone the way they'd planned. I fit right in. The main hall opened up around me. Low ceilings. Fluorescent light. The departure board clicking through its updates with the indifference of a system that runs on schedule, regardless of what any particular human being is going through. The Long Island Railroad had a train at 8:52, 14 minutes. I bought a coffee from the kiosk near the entrance. Black, no sugar, in a paper cup that said, Happy Holidays on the side in 3 different fonts, and stood in front of the departure board drinking it and thinking about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I am thinking about everything. Rosalind and I had stood in this exact station in the spring of 1987, heading back to Long Island after a dinner with her sister in the city. We'd missed the 10:15 and had to wait 40 minutes on a bench near the newsstand. She'd bought a crossword magazine and done half of it in the time we waited, reading clues out loud and accepting suggestions from me even when my suggestions were wrong, which they usually were. You are a very bad crossword partner, she'd told me. I know, I said. I'm better at other things. You are, she'd agreed, and leaned her head on my shoulder. And we sat there in Penn Station on a Tuesday night with no money and a missed train, and I had been, without question, the happiest I had ever been in my life up to that point. I was thinking about that bench when I heard my name. Dad! Vanessa came through the crowd fast, her coat half on, one button done wrong, her hair starting to come down from the arrangement it had been in all evening. She had her phone in her hand, and her eyes were scanning the board. And then they found me, and she came straight at me without slowing down. Dad, stop. Just stop. I'm not moving, I said. I'm drinking my coffee. She stopped 2 feet away, chest rising and falling from the walk, or the run, or the thing that was happening behind her eyes, which I recognized as the expression she'd had at 11 years old when she was trying to decide whether to tell me something she'd broken. Do you have any idea, she said, what you just did in there? I said what I had to say and I left. That's all I did. That's all you. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead, a gesture so like Rosalind when she was frustrated that my chest contracted sharply. Bradley is furious, Dad. His mother is furious. Do you understand what that means for me? For my life? Tell me what it means. It means I have spent 3 years, learning how to exist in that world. How to talk, what to wear, what to say, and what absolutely never to say. And you walk in there and you throw it all away in one night because your feelings got hurt. The coffee cup was warm in my hand. I held on to it. My feelings, I said. Yes. Her voice cracked on the word and she pushed through it. Bradley threw away a toy. Dad, it was a toy, and you made it into a whole thing. You made it into this big thing, and now I'm the one who has to fix it. I'm always the one who has to fix it. I looked at my daughter. She was 34 years old and she was standing in Penn Station on Christmas Eve with her coat buttoned wrong, and underneath the fury and the fear she was shaking. I could see it in her hands, in the way she was gripping her phone, like it was something solid in a room that had stopped having solid things in it. He threw away something I made, I said, with my hands for Sophie in front of my face. I know. He took your mother's photograph and handed it to a waiter like it was trash on a table. Dad? And I sat in a corner of that house all evening while your husband's mother explained to me, very politely, that I did not belong at the main table. I kept my voice level, not low level. I didn't make it a big thing, Vanessa. It already was one. I just said so out loud. She stared at me. Her eyes were bright and wet and angry, and there was something underneath the anger that I did not yet have a name for. Then she straightened her spine, and her chin came up, and she said the thing she had come there to say. You have two choices, Dad. You go back tonight and you apologize to Bradley, to his mother, to everyone at that table. Sincerely. Not the way you sometimes apologize, where the words are technically correct, but your whole face says something different. She held my gaze. Or you go home and you stay there, alone, because I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep being the bridge between your world and mine. Your pride is not worth my marriage. The departure board clicked. The 8:52 appeared in white letters. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, looked for Rosalind in her face, in the line of her jaw, the set of her eyes. Found traces, not enough. When was the last time you apologized to me? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, I said. I dropped the paper cup in the trash can beside the kiosk, the one that said, Happy Holidays in 3 fonts, and I picked up my box and I walked toward the platform entrance. She called after me once. Just my name. The way she'd called it as a little girl when she didn't get what she wanted and couldn't understand why. The sound of it moved through me like a cold current, and I kept walking, because some things you feel all the way to the bone and still do not stop for. The train doors closed at 8:52, exactly as scheduled. I sat by the window and watched the station disappear behind me, and I thought about two choices. About the particular architecture of an ultimatum. How it always presents itself as a wall, when what it actually is, if you look at it long enough, is a door you haven't tried yet. Somewhere between Penn Station and the first long stretch of dark track heading east, I began to think about a third option. The house on Maple Grove Lane looked exactly the same as when I'd left it that afternoon. That was the hardest part. Not the quiet, I had learned the quiet. 3 years of it had taught me where it lived in every room, which corners it gathered in, how it changed texture between morning and night. No, the hardest part was that the house looked entirely unchanged, and I had just come from an evening that had changed something I could not yet name, and the two facts sat beside each other without resolving. The porch light was on. I always left it on when I went out after dark, an old habit from when Vanessa was a teenager, and I wanted her to know that someone was paying attention to when she came home. The wreath on the front door was the one Rosalind had made 3 Christmases ago, from pine branches off the tree in the backyard, bound with red wire she'd bought at the hardware store. It had dried out and gone a little brown at the edges. I hadn't taken it down. I wasn't going to. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, the same hook it had lived on for 22 years, and stood in the entryway a moment with my hand still on the collar, feeling the wool still cold from outside. I went into the kitchen and sat down at the table without taking off my shoes, which Rosalind would have had a firm and immediate opinion about. And I sat there in the particular stillness of a house that knows it is holding only one person. Then something began pulling at the back of my mind, something small and specific, the way a splinter makes itself known. Not with pain, with the persistent suggestion of wrongness. I went back to the entryway, reached into the breast pocket of the jacket, and pulled out the red plastic recorder. Sophie's reporter recorder. She had taken it back at the table, I'd thought. But here it was. She must have put it back when she hugged me goodbye, or I had imagined her taking it. The evening had been full of things I'd tracked imperfectly. The small red light on the side was not blinking, which meant it had either run out of battery or stopped recording at some point. I turned it over in my hands. It was the size of a matchbox, light as a question. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it the way you look at something you're not sure you want to open. Then I pressed play. The first sounds were the ones I expected. The ambient noise of the party, crystal, conversation, the distant string quartet, slightly muffled by the fabric of my jacket pocket. I could hear the moment Sophie had put it there. The rustling, Then the change in sound quality, voices becoming more immediate. I heard myself talking to her. Heard her say, "I miss her," even though I only met her twice. Heard my own voice rougher than I expected, saying, "Missing someone isn't about how many times you met them." I pressed my thumb hard against the edge of the table. Then came the sounds of the party shifting. The recording had continued after Sophie left, after Bradley threw the horse, after I walked out. The device had stayed in my pocket through the train ride, through Penn Station, through the whole ride home. And somewhere in the middle of all that ambient noise, about 40 minutes in, there were two voices I recognized, speaking in what they clearly believed was a private corner of a very large room. Bradley's voice first, lower than his public voice, clipped. She signed the Maple Grove property transfer papers last spring. Mother, she thought they were insurance update forms. Margaret, measured, unhurried, the voice of a woman making a grocery list. And the LLC, his contractor's license is already in motion. Once the transfer clears, we won't need his name attached to anything. The bank will use the LLC, not him. A pause, the sound of a glass being set down. And Vanessa knows nothing about this. Vanessa knows what I need her to know. I stopped the recording. I sat at the kitchen table in the house on Maple Grove Lane on Christmas Eve, and I looked at the watercolor Rosalind had painted of the backyard in the summer of 2016. The one hanging on the wall beside the refrigerator, the one where she'd gotten the light wrong on the oak tree, but the roses exactly right. And I breathed in and out, slowly and deliberately, the way I had learned to breathe on job sites when something structural had failed, and panic was the one thing that would make it worse. My hands were flat on the table. I looked at them. The knuckle on my right index finger, broken in 1994 on a framing job in Huntington, healed slightly crooked. The callus on my left palm from 40 years of tool handles. These hands had built things, solid things, things that were still standing. They were not shaking. I got up, went to the counter, and picked up the phone. It rang twice. Marcus. His voice came through groggy, but sharpening fast. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years in construction management and had learned that calls after midnight were never about nothing. "It's past 12. What happened?" "I need you to come over in the morning," I said. 9 o'clock. Bring the number for that attorney you used in 2009. The business one. A beat. Marcus processing. How bad are we talking? I looked at the recorder on the table, at Rosalind's watercolor on the wall, at the kitchen that had held 30 years of this family's life, and was about to hold something it had never held before, which was the beginning of a plan. "Bad enough that I'm glad I found out tonight," I said, "instead of 6 months from now. 9 o'clock, Marcus. I'll have coffee." I set the phone down. Outside, the snow that had been threatening all evening had finally started. I could see it in the porch light, through the kitchen window, coming down soft and steady, and completely indifferent to what was happening inside this house. I did not go to bed. I sat at that kitchen table with the recorder and my two hands, and the particular clarity that arrives sometimes when something you half knew becomes something you fully know. And I began to think very carefully about the third option. Marcus Reyes lived in a two-family house in Queens that he had bought in 1993 and renovated entirely by himself over the following 4 years. One room at a time, on weekends and holidays and the occasional sick day he had never actually been sick enough to justify. The kitchen was the last room he'd finished, and the one he was proudest of, which you could tell because it was also the most lived in. Countertops worn smooth in the places he used them most. The cabinet above the stove darkened slightly from 30 years of Sunday cooking. A corkboard beside the refrigerator so dense with phone numbers and business cards and takeout menus that it had stopped being organizational and become something closer to archaeological. Marcus had the coffee ready when I got there. He always had the coffee ready. In 38 years of friendship, I had never once arrived at Marcus Reyes's house to find the coffee not already made, and I had stopped remarking on it the way you stop remarking on the sun coming up. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders in the way that doesn't come from a gym but from decades of actual physical work, with hands that looked like they'd been borrowed from someone larger and never quite returned. He had retired from site management 4 years earlier, and he looked, as he always did, faintly impatient about it. He set a mug in front of me and sat down across the table and said nothing, which was how Marcus expressed that he was ready to listen. I put the recorder on the table between us. Play it from the 40-minute mark. He did. He listened to Bradley and Margaret the same way he listened to everything important. Completely still, eyes on the middle distance, mug held in both hands and not moving. When it finished, he set the recorder down and looked at me. They forged your signature on the LLC paperwork, he said. That's not a civil matter, Walter. In New York State, forging a signature on a legal document, especially a business ownership transfer, that's a felony. Criminal, not civil. You're not filing a lawsuit, you're filing a crime report. I know. And the property transfer. If Vanessa signed what she thought were insurance forms, and they were actually deed transfer documents, that's fraud in the inducement. The transfer is voidable, meaning a court can declare it never happened. I figured something like that. Marcus looked at me steadily. So what do you want to do? I want to do it right, I said. Not fast. Right, there's a difference. There always is. He nodded once, pulled his phone off the counter, and scrolled to a number. Catherine Whitfield. She handled a commercial dispute for me back in '09. Business and real estate. Sharp as they come. I'll call her office when they open after the holiday. January 2nd at the earliest. More likely the 6th. The 6th works. Marcus set the phone face down on the table. He refilled both our mugs without asking. Outside, the Queen's morning was doing what Queen's mornings do in late December. Gray, purposeful, entirely uninterested in sentiment. We had been sitting there 20 minutes, talking through what Catherine would need and in what order when my phone rang. Unknown number. New York area code, I picked up. Mr. Hensley? A woman's voice. Measured. Careful, with the particular tension of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say and is still not sure they are going to say it. My name is Dorothy Ramsey. I work for the Kensington family. I apologize for calling on the holiday, but I wasn't sure I would have the nerve again if I waited. Marcus's eyebrows went up. I held up a hand. I'm listening, Mrs. Ramsey, a breath. I saw what happened at that dinner on Christmas Eve. And what they have been doing to your paperwork, Mr. Hensley. I have documentation. I made copies 6 months ago, because something felt wrong and I didn't know what else to do with them, and I didn't know who to trust. Her voice steadied as she went. I have the LLC amendment forms with what appears to be your signature. I have internal correspondence between Mr. Kensington and his attorney about the Maple Grove transfer. I have a copy of the document your daughter signed, and I have the original insurance form it was presented alongside, so you can see exactly how it was framed to her. My hand tightened around the phone. Why are you bringing this to me now? I asked. Why not 6 months ago? The pause that followed was not evasion. It was the pause of someone deciding how honest to be. My son works construction, she said. He's been running his own crew in Brooklyn for 9 years. Last spring, Mr. Kensington met him at a site walkthrough. My son didn't know who he was, and Mr. Kensington didn't know whose mother I was. In front of 6 men, Mr. Kensington told my son that men like him don't build things. They just move dirt. Another pause, shorter. I went home that evening and made the copies. I've been waiting for the right moment ever since. Marcus was watching me from across the table, reading my face the way he'd been reading it for nearly 4 decades. How did you get my number, Mrs. Ramsey? I called the Hensley construction office this morning. I had to try 3 times. The first 2 times I hung up before anyone answered. The third time, a man named Terrence picked up and gave me this number when I told him it was urgent. I hope that was all right. It was, I said. Can you send me what you have? I already scanned everything. And I heard in her voice the relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy and has finally found somewhere to put it down. I can send it to whatever address you give me within the hour. I looked at Marcus. He was already tearing a piece of paper off the notepad beside the corkboard. After I hung up, he looked at me for a long moment. A woman inside the house, he said. For 11 years. Marcus exhaled through his nose. The sound he made when something had exceeded even his expectations of how a situation could develop. Walter, I think you need to call Catherine Whitfield yourself, today. Don't wait for the 6th. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. It was still warm. Not today, I said. I want everything Dorothy sends us in hand first. I want to walk into that office with the full picture, not a piece of it. Catherine charges $400 an hour, and I'm not paying her to watch me organize my thoughts. Marcus looked at me a long moment. Then he reached over and refilled my mug a 3rd time. You haven't slept, he said. No, you going to? I looked out the kitchen window at the gray December morning settling over Queens. Somewhere across the borough, in a limestone building on the Upper East Side, Bradley Kensington was waking up on Christmas morning, believing he had handled everything correctly. Not yet, I said. The 11 days between Christmas and the 6th of January were the quietest I had spent in years. Not peaceful quiet. There is a difference. Peaceful is what you feel when things have resolved. Quiet is what you feel when you are in the middle of deciding something large, and the deciding requires every available frequency of your attention. Dorothy's documents arrived by email on the morning of December 27th. 14 scanned pages, organized by date, labeled in the careful handwriting of a woman who understood that documentation is only useful if someone else can follow it. Marcus printed everything at the office supply place on the boulevard, and we spread it across his kitchen table and went through it page by page, twice the way we used to go through blueprints on a big job before the first nail went in. What Dorothy had sent was thorough. The LLC amendment form, with Walter A. Hensley, signed in ink that was too consistent, too upright. None of the slight leftward lean my signature had carried since a tendon injury in 1997. The Maple Grove transfer document, with Vanessa's signature on the third page, and the innocuous-looking insurance form it had been paper-clipped to when she signed it. Internal emails between Bradley and his attorney, 3 of them, spanning 6 months, mapping out the transfer sequence with the confidence of men who did not expect to be read. I did not feel anger looking at those pages. I felt something colder and more useful, which was certainty. I spent the remaining days writing. Not letters, a list, yellow legal pad, pencil, 8 items numbered and specific, the same way I had always written project specifications. No unnecessary words, no ambiguity, nothing left to interpretation. By January 5th, the list was done. I read it back 3 times, changed 2 words, and put it in my jacket pocket. Catherine Whitfield kept her office on the 31st floor of a building on 6th Avenue, with a lobby that had the particular self-importance of a place that charges by the hour. Her assistant brought me in at 2 o'clock exactly. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, dark-haired, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the focused stillness of someone who had learned to listen to the whole sentence before forming the next question. She shook my hand the way people shake hands when they mean it. Firm, brief, done. Mr. Hensley, Marcus speaks well of you. Sit down. I sat. I put the yellow legal pad on the desk between us. She looked at it. Then at me. Walk me through it. 8 items, I said. In order. She uncapped her pen. The first item was the LLC. I told her about the recording, the forged signature, the amendment filed without my knowledge. She stopped me twice to clarify dates. When I finished, she said, allowed use of a business entity plus signature forgery. That's criminal exposure under New York law. We document it. We submit it to the district attorney's office with the recording and Dorothy's copies. That runs parallel to everything else on its own track. Understood. Item 2. Item 2 was the Maple Grove transfer. She asked to see Dorothy's copies. I slid them across. She read without speaking, turned to the email chain, read that too. Then she took off her reading glasses entirely and set them on the desk. The transfer is voidable, she said. Fraud in the inducement. Your daughter signed under a material misrepresentation of what she was signing. A New York court can unwind it. The property reverts to your name as though the transfer never occurred. She paused. Do you want to pursue that? No, I said. I want to sell it. Item 3, an off-market sale. No listing, no sign, quick close. She wrote that down without comment. Item 4 was I told her I wanted everything. The proceeds from the house, the remaining business assets, the personal accounts, directed into a charitable trust. The Rosalind Hensley Foundation, supporting elderly individuals without family support networks. Structured as a revocable living trust to avoid probate, with a notarized pour-over will as the backup document. Catherine looked up. Nothing to Vanessa. There's a letter, I said. Sealed, you'll hold it, you'll know when. She wrote that down. Item 5 was the LLC itself. I wanted Marcus named as sole owner of record effective January 7th. Already filed, I told her. She confirmed she'd verify the state records. Item 6 was the submission to the state licensing board, the professional review board that governed Bradley's credentials. The recording, the forged documents, Dorothy's internal correspondence. It will move slowly, Catherine said. These boards are thorough, which means unhurried. I'm not in a hurry. I just need it done correctly. Item 7 was a personal account transfer. moving my liquid assets out of the joint account I had maintained since Rosalind's death and into a personal account in my name only, effective the end of January. Then I set down my pen. There's an eighth item, I said. Catherine waited. A college savings plan, I said. In the name of Sophie Kensington, 7 years old, Bradley Kensington's daughter from his first marriage. I kept my voice even. I want Mrs. Dorothy Ramsay named as custodian. I want the custodianship change to require court approval, so it can't be altered without a judge signing off. And I want the contribution amount to be enough that it matters, regardless of what happens to the Kensington family finances. Catherine set her pen down and looked at me over the desk, with the measured attention of someone recalibrating. She's not your biological grandchild, she said. No, she's not. Then why? I thought about a small girl in a green velvet dress pulling at collar she couldn't stand. Recording the sound of a party she had already decided wasn't happy enough. Recording the fireplace. Recording the soup boiling. Recording things nobody else thought to save. Because she's the only person in that house, I said, who treated me like I was worth something. That counts. In my experience, it counts for quite a lot. Catherine held my gaze a moment. Then she picked up her pen. And Vanessa, she said again, beyond the letter. I looked at the yellow legal pad. 8 items. Everything I had spent 40 years building, redirected in 8 numbered lines. Vanessa gets the chance to figure out who she is without me making it easy, I said. That's more than most people get. It might be the most useful thing I've ever given her. Catherine wrote for another minute. Then she looked up. I'll have the trust documents drafted by the 10th, the will amendment by the 13th. Everything notarized and filed before you need it to be. January 14th, I said. She didn't ask why. She just wrote it down. Rosalind used to say that a home is not the walls. She said it first in 1989, when we were talking about whether to add a second bathroom to the house or put the money into the business instead. She was standing at the kitchen counter, with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched yet, looking out the window at the backyard oak that was still thin enough then to see through. A home is not the walls, Walter. It's the decisions made inside them. We put the money into the business. The oak tree grew. I thought about that on the morning of January 12th, as I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at 30 years of decisions stacked up around me. The watercolor on the wall, the calendar with Rosalind's handwriting still on it, the drawer that stuck in cold weather because the wood had expanded, and I had never gotten around to planing it down. Every room in that house was a decision. Some of them were good ones. I had 2 days. I worked the way I always worked on a job with a fixed deadline, methodically, without sentiment in the doing of it, saving the sentiment for after. The bedroom first. I kept 3 things. The photograph of Rosalind on the front steps in July of 2018. The Bible she'd kept on her nightstand, with the broken spine, because she'd opened it to the same passages so many times the binding had given up trying to hold. And the small wooden box of her jewelry that I had not opened in 3 years, and was not going to open now. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the tools in the garage, I arranged with Marcus, some to storage, some to the donation center, some to the men at the yard who had worked for me since before a few of them were old enough to drive. The box took most of the second day. Cherrywood. I had bought the board at the lumber yard in November before any of this, because I had been planning to make a small chest for Sophie and had not yet decided on the dimensions. The grain was tight and even, the kind that takes a finish well. I cut the pieces on the afternoon of January 12th, jointed the edges, glued them up, and left them overnight with clamps. In the morning I unclamped everything, fitted the lid, cut the hinge mortises with a chisel, set the brass hinges, and sanded the whole thing through. 80 grit, then 120, then 220, finishing by hand with the grain. Then I took my carving knife and cut Rosalind's name into the lid. Not printed, her actual signature, the one I had watched her write on 37 years of birthday cards and Christmas tags, and the back of the photograph she took of everything, because she believed pictures should be labeled while you still remembered what was in them. I had memorized the shape of it. Inside the box I placed 3 things. The wedding photograph from 1981, Rosalind and me outside the church, rice in her hair, both of us young enough that I barely recognized myself. Her wedding ring, wrapped in the square of white flannel I had kept it in since the hospital. And a small drive holding a video I recorded at the kitchen table that evening, just before dark. 1 candle. No script, I had tried writing one and thrown it away, because it sounded like a man performing a version of himself he thought was appropriate for the occasion. And Rosalind had never had patience for that kind of thing, and neither did I. I sat down in front of the camera and I talked to my daughter. Vanessa, if you're watching this, you found the house empty and you found this box. I want you to understand something, and I need you to hear it straight. I am not leaving because I'm angry. I've been angry tonight and it passed, the way it always does. I'm leaving because I heard something in your voice at Penn Station that told me I had become a problem you were managing, a burden you were accounting for, and a father shouldn't be those things to his daughter. Not if he has any say in the matter. I stopped, started again. The joint account closes at the end of January. After that, you'll need to stand on your own. I know that sounds hard. It is hard. Your mother did hard things every day of her life, and she did them without making anyone feel guilty for the hardship. And she raised you, so I know you have it in you. I've always known that. I stopped again. The candle threw unsteady light across the kitchen. The box is for you. Everything in it is yours. That's all I have to say for now, except this. Whatever you decide to do next, whatever version of yourself you decide to be, when nobody's watching and there's no audience to perform for, I hope you choose the real one. Your mother always did. It made her the finest person I ever knew. I saved the file, transferred it, placed it in the box on top of the folded flannel, and closed the lid over Rosalind's name. Then I carried the box to the kitchen table and set it in the exact center. Between the two place settings I had not bothered to clear, because clearing them had felt, in some way I could not fully articulate, like giving something up that I was not ready to give up yet. Marcus came at 7 with the truck. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the box on the table, and at the watercolor on the wall, and at the calendar with Rosalind's handwriting, and he did not say anything for a moment, which from Marcus was the equivalent of a long speech. "You good?" he said finally. "Ask me in a year." He picked up one end of the dresser. I picked up the other. We carried it out to the truck without another word, because that was how Marcus and I had always worked best. Side by side, both of us pulling the same weight, not needing to talk about it to know it was being shared. I went back inside one last time. The kitchen was empty except for the box and the watercolor and the stuck drawer and 30 years of decisions made inside 4 walls that were just walls now. I turned off the light. Marcus picked me up 5:15 in the morning. He pulled to the curb on Maple Grove Lane in the dark, headlights cutting through the January cold, and I was already outside with the canvas duffel on the front step, because I had not slept and there was no point pretending otherwise. The bag was the green one I had bought in 1994 for a job upstate that ran 3 weeks longer than the contract said it would. A bag I had packed and unpacked so many times that the zipper pull had been replaced twice, and the left shoulder strap carried a repair sewn in black thread that never quite matched the original green. Marcus looked at the bag, looked at me. "That's all you're taking." It was not a question. "That's all I need." He put it in the back without further comment, and we drove through Long Island in the dark, the way we had driven to job sites for 30 years. Marcus with both hands on the wheel, radio low on a news station neither of us was actually listening to. The particular comfortable silence of men who have run out of things they need to say to each other, and arrived, on the other side of that, at something better. The parkway was clear at that hour. The city lights came up on the left as we crossed into Queens, the skyline doing what it always did in the dark, glittering with the complete indifference of something too large to notice any particular departure. I had been through the airport enough times to move through it without thinking. Check-in, bag dropped, security. The long corridor to the terminal with its particular smell of recycled air and coffee that was always slightly burned no matter which kiosk you bought it from. I bought a cup anyway, black, no sugar, and stood in front of the departures board and found my flight. Key West, connecting through Miami, boarding at 7:45. I had booked it 11 days earlier, the morning after I left Catherine's office, sitting at Marcus's kitchen table with the yellow legal pad still in front of me and the coffee going cold. I had looked at the screen for a long time before I clicked the button that said, "One way." Not because I was uncertain. Because clicking it meant something had become real that had previously only been decided, and those are different things. I found a seat near the gate, set the duffel between my feet, and held the coffee in both hands. Rosalind had always wanted to go to Key West, She'd brought it up 3 times over the years. Once in 2003, when we'd seen a travel piece about it in a magazine at the dentist's office, and she'd torn out the page and kept it in her purse for 6 months. Once in 2011, when Vanessa mentioned a friend going for spring break, and Rosalind said, completely seriously, that she did not see why spring break was exclusively for people under 25. And once in 2019, 8 months before the diagnosis, when we were sitting on the back porch on a September evening, and she said, out of nowhere, in the way she said things that had been sitting in her mind for a while, Walter, we should go to Key West. We should, not someday, actually go. All right, I said. She turned to look at me with the expression that meant she was deciding whether I was being agreeable or actually agreeing, which, with me, were not always the same thing. Next spring, she said. We've earned it. We did not go the next spring. The diagnosis came in February, and the springs after that were organized around different things. And then there were no more springs, and Key West stayed in the category of things we had meant to do and run out of time for. A category that, by the end, had grown larger than I liked to look at directly. I was going now, not as a consolation, not as the kind of gesture people make when they are trying to heal something by symbolically completing it. I was going because it was warm, and I had never lived somewhere warm, because Rosalind had wanted to go. And because I was 65 years old, and I had spent those 65 years building things for other people. Buildings, companies, a family. And it seemed reasonable, finally, to build something for myself. At 7:20, I took out my phone. The message took me 4 tries to get right. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I kept writing more than was necessary. And the thing about important messages is that they should only be as long as the truth requires. I typed. I found the third option, Vanessa. I hope one day you find yours, Dad. I read it twice, then I sent it. 37 seconds later, the phone rang. Vanessa's name on the screen. White letters. Her contact photo. The one I had taken at Thanksgiving 4 years earlier. Her laughing at something Marcus had said, head tipped back. In that photo, for just a moment, she looked so much like her mother that I had made it her contact photo, without ever telling her why. The phone rang. I looked at her face on the screen, that laughing, unguarded face from 4 years ago, and I felt something move through my chest that was not anger and not grief, and was not something I had a clean word for. Something that lives in the space between loving a person completely and understanding that love is not always enough to make them ready for what they need. The phone rang a 4th time. I turned it face down on my knee. It rang twice more, then it stopped. The voicemail notification appeared. I did not listen to it. I picked up the duffel, finished the last of the cold coffee, and walked to the gate. The plane pushed back at 7:52, 7 minutes behind schedule, which in my experience is about as close to on time as anything gets. I watched the terminal lights slide past the window, watched a ground crew worker in an orange vest diminish and disappear. Watched the whole thing fall away beneath us as we climbed, the lights of Queens spreading out below in their dense, indifferent grid. Then the dark water of the bay. Then the Atlantic. Then nothing but altitude, and the particular silence of a man who has stopped waiting for something and started moving towards something else instead. Somewhere below me, in a house on Maple Grove Lane that no longer had my name on it, a cherrywood box sat on a kitchen table. Somewhere in Manhattan, a woman who loved her husband more than she loved me was waking up next to a man who did not yet know that the floor had shifted underneath everything he thought he owned. And somewhere ahead of me, 1,100 miles south, the sun was already up. Marcus called me on my 4th morning in Key West. I want to be clear about the timing, because it matters. What Marcus told me that morning had happened 9 days before I boarded the plane. The events he described had unfolded while I was still on Maple Grove Lane, still packing boxes, still sitting at Catherine Whitfield's desk, going through 8 items on a yellow legal pad. I was hearing about them after the fact from a dock in Florida, with a pelican working the water 12 feet in front of me, and the January sun doing things to the surface of the Gulf that January sun in New York has no business doing. The first 4 days had been quiet in a way I had not experienced in years. I had rented a small place on the water from a retired schoolteacher named Alma, who asked no questions, made excellent coffee, and had a porch that faced east, so the morning light came straight at you like something that meant business. I had slept. I had eaten at the counter of a diner where they knew your order by the 3rd visit. I had walked the harbor in the early mornings before the tourists arrived, which in January meant I had the whole thing to myself. I was on the dock with my second cup when the phone rang. "You sleeping?" Marcus said. "Like I've been doing it my whole life." "What happened?" He paused the way he does when he has something to deliver and wants to get the sequence right. "Bradley went to the bank on January 9th, Marcus said. He had a contract on a development site in New Jersey. Commercial, 7 figures. He was using Hensley Construction LLC as the credit anchor for the loan. The bank runs an ownership verification. Standard procedure on any business entity named in a credit application. The loan officer pulled the records. A beat. Hensley Construction LLC had transferred ownership to a new party of record as of January 7th. No outstanding credit lines available to third-party applicants. The officer called Bradley's attorney 20 minutes after the application was submitted. I watched the Pelican drop off the piling and hit the water in a clean, committed dive. "How'd he find out it was you?" "He didn't at first. He went straight to the office." Marcus paused. "I was sitting at your old desk when he walked in. He looked at me the way people look at something that shouldn't be where it is." "What did he say?" Marcus's voice shifted slightly, not unkind, just precise, the way he got when he was quoting someone accurately. He said, "Where is Hensley?" I told him Mr. Hensley was no longer affiliated with this company, and that I was the owner of record as of January 7th, and asked if there was something I could help him with. Marcus let that sit for a second. He said, "This is impossible, he can't just," and I said he can. He did. "Is there anything else, Mr. Kensington?" I set my coffee down on the dock beside me. "Marcus, did he understand what he'd actually done? Using the LLC without authorization?" "Catherine's office sent a letter to his attorney the same afternoon," Marcus said. "Formal notice that the attempted use of Hensley Construction LLC as a credit instrument without documented authorization from the then owner of record constituted fraudulent misrepresentation to a financial institution. Under banking law, that's not a civil matter. That's federal exposure." His attorney called back within 2 hours. "What did Catherine say?" "Catherine said she'd be happy to discuss it further if they wanted to put something in writing." Marcus made the sound he makes when something has satisfied him at a deep, structural level. A short exhale through the nose, like a joint settling into place. "They did not put anything in writing." "And the New Jersey project?" "That's where it compounds. I'd already sent notice to the material supplier out of Newark, the one we've used for 15 years. Hensley Construction was no longer extending preferred vendor rates to any third-party projects, effective January 8th. They called the site contractor the next morning. "Without our rate, materials cost on the New Jersey job goes up 32%. A beat. They were already on a fixed-price contract. The overrun comes out of the developer margin, which is Bradley. How far behind does that put the project?" "Minimum 4 months, and that's if nothing else moves." I looked out at the water, flat, silver, entirely uninterested. "Nothing else has to move," I said. "It'll move on its own now." Dorothy called me on the evening of January 20th. By then, the joint account had closed. I had known the date it would close for 2 weeks. I had written it on the yellow legal pad myself, item 7, but knowing a date and hearing what happens on it are not the same activity. "She went to the ATM on the corner at 7:40 in the morning," Dorothy said. "She had her coffee in one hand. She put the card in. It came back out. How much was in her personal account?" $60, Mr. Hensley." I closed my eyes. "Did she seem?" I started. "She seemed like a woman who had just had 2 things happen to her at once and was deciding which one to feel first," Dorothy said. "She stood at the ATM for maybe 30 seconds after the transaction. Then she picked up her coffee and walked back to the building." "Did she go straight up?" "No, she sat on the front steps in January, no coat, with her coffee. For about 15 minutes. Her voice shifted, careful and deliberate. "I've worked in this building for 3 years, Mr. Hensley. I have seen Vanessa Kensington perform composure in rooms full of people. I've seen her manage things, social situations, her husband's moods, his mother's expectations. I have never, not once, seen her just sit somewhere and let herself be in it." I pressed the heel of my palm against my eye socket and breathed through it. "And Bradley, when did he notice the account?" "He tried to move funds that evening. It had already been frozen on his end. Catherine Whitfield's office filed the restriction that afternoon, effective immediately." She paused. "He called someone at 8 o'clock. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, he went to the kitchen and stood at the window a long time. What was he looking at? Nothing, Dorothy said. That's what made it different. I sat on the porch in the Key West evening, the warm air moving slow off the water, and I thought about my daughter sitting on cold stone steps in January with a coffee cup and $60, and the particular weight of a life that had just become entirely her own responsibility. It was not a comfortable thing to think about, but it was a true one. He slid papers under her door the next morning, Dorothy said. I thought you should know that too. Tell me. The papers had been there when Vanessa opened her door at 7 in the morning. Dorothy had been in the kitchen. She heard the door open, and then she heard nothing for about 10 seconds, which is a very long time to hear nothing. I knew the sound she meant, the specific silence of someone reading something they were not ready to read. Divorce papers, I said. Though I already knew. Filed through his attorney's office, date stamped January 20th. The same evening you and I spoke. She paused. He didn't knock, didn't say good morning. Just put them under the door sometime between when I left the night before and when she woke up. Did she sign them? No, Dorothy said. She put them on the kitchen counter and she made herself breakfast. Scrambled eggs. She stood at the stove and made scrambled eggs and ate them at the counter. And she did not look at the papers once while she was eating. Good, I said. She called someone after breakfast. I don't know who. She spoke for about 20 minutes in the bedroom with the door closed, and when she came out she had written a name and a phone number on a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. Dorothy's voice held something careful in it. The name was a woman's name, an attorney. Vanessa had found her own lawyer. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the table and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would have been more useful than the silence. There's something else, Dorothy said. January 23rd. Tell me. She told me carefully, the way she told everything, in order, without editorializing, letting the facts carry their own weight. Vanessa had come out of the bathroom on the morning of the 23rd and stood in the hallway. Dorothy had been polishing the side table near the entrance, the weekly task she always did on Thursdays. She looked up when she heard the door open. Vanessa was standing in the middle of the hallway with both hands at her sides, looking at the far wall, not at anything on the wall. At the wall itself, the way people look at walls when what they are actually looking at is something happening inside them. She stood there about 30 seconds, Dorothy said. Then she looked at me, and I don't know how to describe what her face did exactly, except to say it did 3 things at once. And 2 of them were things I had never seen on her face before. What were they? Fear, Dorothy said, and something underneath the fear that looked like the very beginning of something else. Something that didn't have a name yet. Vanessa had looked at her and said, Dorothy, I think I need a lawyer. Not Bradley's family's lawyer. Mine. You said that already, Dorothy told her gently. I know. Vanessa pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth for a moment. I mean, I need her for something else too now. Dorothy had understood. She did not say so directly. She was not a woman who stated what was already clear. But she crossed the hallway and put her hand on Vanessa's arm and said, Sit down, I'll make tea. They sat at the kitchen table together for 20 minutes. 2 women in an apartment that belonged to neither of them in any way that mattered, drinking tea, while the January light came through the windows, and the papers on the counter sat exactly where Vanessa had left them. Did she say anything else? I asked. She said, Sophie told me something the other day. Dorothy's voice softened at the name, the way voices do when a child enters a conversation. She said her grandfather always said that figuring it out is the bravest thing a person can do. She said brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing anyway. I put the phone down on the table for a moment. Just for a moment. Picked it back up. What did you say? I said, your father sounds like a smart man, and she said he is. He's also the most aggravating man I have ever known in my life. Dorothy paused, and then she laughed. Just for a second, but it was a real one. I stood up from the table and walked to the porch railing and stood there with the phone in one hand and the other hand flat on the wood, feeling the grain of it, the particular warmth of sun-heated timber that my hands had known their whole lives. My daughter was pregnant, alone, in 20-degree January Manhattan, with divorce papers on her kitchen counter and a lawyer's number written on a notepad. And she had laughed, a real one. Dorothy, I said. Thank you, Mr. Hensley, she said. There's one more thing. Bradley found out 2 days later. About the pregnancy. She told me how his voice changed when he came home that evening, and Vanessa told him. Not warm, not cold. Recalibrating, the way a man recalculates odds when a variable changes. He brought flowers the next morning, Dorothy said, with a tone that made flowers sound like something to be cautious about. He said they should work things out. For the baby, what did Vanessa do with the flowers? She put them in a vase, Dorothy said. On the counter, next to the divorce papers. She didn't move the papers. Marcus called on a Wednesday in late February. By then I had been in Key West 6 weeks, and the days had taken on a shape I had not expected. Not the shape of waiting, which is what I had assumed they would be, but something closer to the shape of a man, remembering what his hands were for. I had found the boat in the 3rd week of January, up on blocks at the far end of a yard on the north side of the island, under a tarp that had been there long enough to have opinions about it. A 1962 Chesapeake sloop, 31 feet, with a cracked coaming, a rotted section of deck beam, and a hull that a man who knew what he was looking at could see was still fundamentally sound underneath everything that had been allowed to happen to her. The yard owner told me she'd been sitting 11 years. He told me it like a warning. I bought her that afternoon. I worked on her every day. Not to fill the time, I want to be clear about that. I have never believed in filling time. Time is not a hole. I worked on her because there was a right way to bring that boat back, and I knew what it was. And there is a specific dignity in being 65 years old, and still knowing exactly what to do with your hands. The license board moved, Marcus said, faster than Catherine expected. How fast? Preliminary review completed February 18th. They found the forged signature exhibit persuasive. Combined with the LLC fraud, the board didn't deliberate long. He gave me the rest of it over the following months, in installments, the way you get news from a friend who's appointed himself the person who will tell you things straight. Bradley's attorney released a statement about a transition into advisory consulting work, unlicensed, about 1/3 of what he used to charge. The house? I asked, on a call in July. Listed in July, sold in 3 weeks, they're in a 2-bedroom rental now. I thought about the dining room on the Upper East Side, the long, dark table, the crystal, the chair they had put me in near the kitchen, beside the service corridor. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt something quieter, the particular weight of watching a consequence arrive that you set in motion and cannot call back. It was right. It was still not easy. Dorothy called at 9:15 that same morning. She had left the Kensington household in July and was working in Brooklyn Heights now, and her voice carried the settled quality of a woman who has put distance between herself and something difficult and is breathing better for it. Sophie is in a new school, she said. She's quiet. But Mr. Hensley. Her voice softened the way voices do when the person being named is someone you are working to protect. She has the horse on her nightstand. She asked me last week if you knew she still had it. My throat closed. Tell her yes, I said when I could. Tell her I know. I also want you to know. His attorney made 2 more attempts on the college account. Catherine's office responded once. There have been no further attempts. Thank you, Dorothy, for all of it, from the very beginning. It was the right thing, she said. I knew it when I made those copies. I just needed the moment to arrive. After she hung up, I sat on the dock in the August heat, the full, honest Key West heat that asks something of you just by being present, and I let it ask. Marcus called again on the afternoon of October 15th. Yesterday, he said, without preamble. October 14th, a boy. I sat very still in the cockpit of the boat. Both of them are fine. Vanessa is fine. He's healthy. 5 pounds, 11 ounces. A breath that carried everything. She named him James Harold Hensley. No Kensington anywhere in the name. I put the phone down on the seat beside me. James, Rosalind's father. Harold, mine. Both names given to a boy who had arrived on October 14th belonging to no story but his own. The dock lines held. The harbor moved in its patient, indifferent way. And I sat in the cockpit of a boat that had been broken and put back together and was now finally nearly ready. And I pressed both hands flat against the wheel and breathed until the burning behind my eyes did what it needed to do. I picked up the phone. Marcus. Yeah, 38 years. That was enough. It always had been. I went inside, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope with Vanessa's name on the front. I looked at it a moment. Then I put on my coat, walked to the post office, and slid it through the mail slot. It was done. December in Key West is nothing like December in New York. There is no snow. The light comes off the water, warm and low in the late afternoon sideways, through the palms, the kind of light that has no interest in being dramatic. After 11 months, I had learned to find that restful. I was on deck when I heard the car on the gravel, the particular sound of someone who has driven a long way and is finally stopping. I did not put down the cloth I was using on the bright work. I kept working, some things you have to let come to you. Then I heard the small feet on the dock planks. Running. Grandpa Walter! I turned around. Sophie hit me at full speed, both arms around my waist. Her face pressed into my chest, and I held on with both arms, the way you hold on to something you were not sure you would ever hold again. And my eyes went hot, and I let them. When I looked up, Vanessa was standing at the end of the dock. She had James Harold in a carrier against her chest. 2 months old, eyes open, taking inventory of the world with the serious expression of someone who had just arrived and was not yet sure what to make of it. She was wearing the same blue coat she'd had at Penn Station a year ago. It was buttoned correctly this time. We looked at each other across 40 feet of dock. She did not run, neither did I. We are both Hensleys, and Hensleys take a moment. You didn't tell me you were okay, she said. I had to read it in a letter. I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it. I've been standing on my own for 5 months, Dad. I know, I said. Marcus told me. She looked down at James Harold, at the top of his head, the small serious face, then back up at me. So what happens now? I looked past her shoulder at the boat. At the name I had carved into her transom 2 weeks earlier, the letters filled with black paint, clear in the December afternoon light. Rosalind May. The boat's ready now, I said. We find out if she floats. Sophie pulled back and looked up at me with great seriousness. Does she float? She better. I spent 8 months on her. Sophie was already moving toward the boat, shoes off before she reached the rail, climbing aboard with the fearlessness of a child who has decided something is safe before being told that it is. Vanessa watched her go. Then she looked at me, and her face did something complicated, mouth pressed tight, jaw working. And then it gave way and she laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded, the kind that comes from somewhere you forgot you had. Rosalind's laugh, the same shape, the same timing, catching you off guard the way joy always did in this family when it finally arrived. I walked down the dock toward my daughter and my grandson, and the child who had named a wooden horse after me, and was currently standing on the bow of a restored sloop, demanding to know where the sail was. The afternoon light was warm on the water. I did not look back. I have told you everything now. An old man, a sold house, a cherrywood box on a kitchen table, a wooden horse on a little girl's nightstand, and a restored boat with a name carved into the transom, waiting on a Key West dock in December. That is the whole of it. But before you go, let me tell you what I actually learned, because the story is only worth telling if the lesson survives it. People sometimes call what I did revenge, getting even, settling scores. I want to be honest with you, what I did was not revenge. Revenge is hot. Revenge is a man swinging in a dark room hoping to hit something. What I did was cold and careful, and took 2 years of paying very close attention, and every single step of it was legal, documented, and true. Call it family justice if you need a name for it, the kind that doesn't come from a courtroom, but from a man who finally decided his own life was worth protecting. Here is the first thing. I spent 3 years mistaking endurance for love. I thought that if I absorbed enough, the seat by the kitchen, the eyes that passed over me, the small daily arithmetic of being tolerated, that eventually the absorbing would be recognized as devotion, and someone would move my chair to the main table. That is not how it works, ever. People do not reward your patience with respect. They calibrate to it. When you teach a room that you will accept the corner seat, the room stops seeing the corner as an insult. It starts seeing it as your address. Here is the second thing, and it took me 65 years. Dignity is not something other people hand you at a dinner party. It is not distributed by hosts. It is a structure you build yourself. And like everything else I ever built, it holds only if you are willing to say, "This joint is wrong" out loud, in front of people. At the exact moment it would be easier to say nothing. Here is the third thing, and it is the one I would want you to carry out of here if you carry nothing else. My daughter did not come back to me because I punished her. She came back because I stopped standing between her and the truth. For 3 years I had been a cushion. I paid the bills that softened her choices. I swallowed the insults that would have told her what kind of man she had married. I made her life bearable enough that she never had to look at it directly. Love, I told myself. It was not love, it was anesthesia. And the kindest thing I ever did for Vanessa was let her feel something. There is a version of this story where I apologized that night, where I went back into that room and said the words, and kept my seat by the kitchen, and kept my daughter's phone number, and kept the peace. And in that version, the papers still get forged. The house is still gone. Sophie still watches a man throw a gift in a bin and learns that this is what adults are permitted to do to each other. In that version, I keep everything except the only thing that was ever mine. So if you are sitting at a table where you are tolerated rather than wanted, I am not going to tell you to burn it down. I am going to tell you something quieter and harder. Stop setting it. Stop arriving early. Stop hoping the work is still yours. The people who belong at your table will pull up their own chair. You will never have to beg them, and you will never have to earn it twice. And to anyone my age listening, it is not too late. I want to say that as plainly as I know how. I was 65 with a dead wife, an empty house, and a daughter who had drawn a line and put me on the wrong side of it. I am 66 now, on a boat I rebuilt with my own hands, with a grandson named for two men who worked their whole lives, and a girl who is not my blood and is entirely my family. The last chapter is not a formality. It is a chapter. Write it. A pastor friend of mine once told me, God does not promise that the people we love will choose wisely. He only promises we do not have to carry their choices forever. I held on to that through every hard mile of this year. I am giving it to you now. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been the invisible one in the room, or the one who finally chose the third option, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. And if someone you know needs to hear this today, share it with them. It costs you nothing. It might mean everything to them. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to stay. There is more worth telling. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for staying until the very last word. This story is a work of storytelling. It weaves fictional elements. Names, places, and events are imagined. Around human truths I believe are worth hearing. It was written, shaped, and told by a human being who has sat at a few uncomfortable tables of his own. If that is not the kind of storytelling you are looking for, no hard feelings at all. Step out here with my full respect and go find what speaks to you. Take good care of yourself.